Good morning. This is the moderator of the meeting. Welcome to the Board of Psychology's board meeting. Before we get started, I would like to remind board members and staff who are not speaking to mute their microphones. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a briefly reminder or simply mute microphones not to interrupt the meeting. We do have members of the public in the audience and meeting minutes are being taken, so please identify yourself before speaking. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. When the board president reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the direction of the board, I will turn on the Q&A feature and announce its opening. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by clicking on the icon with a question mark located at the bottom center of their WebEx screen. These instructions are being displayed on the screen for your reference and will be displayed each time public comment is requested. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of the WebEx screen, members of the public who wish to make a comment will type, "I would like to make a public comment," or "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a comment, and we'll be taking comments in the order that they are received. We will call on the member of the public and unmute their microphone, and when they've concluded, we'll move on to the next member of the public. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for the members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comments. This is not a means to ask questions of the moderator or members of the board. Such inquiries submitted using this feature will not be answered. If any attendees utilize profane language, they will be simply muted. And if they are using a profane display name, they will not be called on to not subject the members of the public or the board members and staff to profane language. While you are free to express criticism or negative views, for the sake of the members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making comments to the board. And just to point out, the hand-raising feature is going to be utilized by the board members and staff to facilitate the discussion of agenda items. So members of the public, if you utilize the hand-raising feature, we won't call on you, but we will accept a request for public comment when you utilize it during those periods. And thank you. Moderator is passing it back to the board president, Seiron.
Thank you so much, moderator. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the July meeting of the California Board of Psychology. Before we begin, I would like to advise all individuals observing or participating in the meeting that the meeting is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N2920. Pursuant to this order, neither board member locations nor public meeting location are provided. Public participation may be through the WebEx link as provided through the agenda. And if you have trouble getting on the call to listen or participate, please call 916-574-7720. Many thanks to our colleagues at Solid for moderating today's session. And thank you to our board staff who've worked to, in these extraordinary times, to continue the board's operations and provide an opportunity for us to meet over teleconference and through this platform. Participants watching the webcast will be able to observe the meeting, but in order to participate, we ask that you join the WebEx meeting with information and instructions also posted on the Board of Psychology's website. So with that, I would like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Gage, would you please call the roll to establish quorum?
Certainly. Bernal. Kasuga.
Here.
Cervantes.
Here.
Fu.
Here.
Harbsheets.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Rogers. Tate.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. We will now move to item 18 for public comment for items not on the agenda. We ask that before we invite speakers to come forward, I would ask individuals making comments to not discuss the specifics, including names as to pending complaints, pending licensing applications, or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Such discussions are considered ex parte communications, as they could provide information to the members that is outside of the record in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. Therefore, such discussions may create a conflict and interfere with the board's capacity to make necessary determinations. Board staff is available to speak to you individually and answer your questions outside of the hearing of board members. You can email the board at bopmail@dca.ca.gov. The board is eager to listen attentively to your comments, and while there may be a desire to engage in further discussion with comments presented during this time, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Although this may give the impression we're not being responsive, these procedures are critical to ensure our compliance with the Open Meetings Act and to avoid compromising the speaker's goals of the board's mission. With that, Madam Moderator, could you please open the lines for public comment for items not on the agenda?
This is the moderator. At the direction of the board, I have opened the Q&A feature for public comment. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with a question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I'm sharing the instructions on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of the WebEx screen, type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to.
Mr. President? Mr. Fu?
Yes.
I just wanted to point out, I thought the moderator in the beginning had initially said that members of the public should identify themselves, but then said that they did not have to. I just wanted to reiterate that members of the public do not have to specifically identify themselves. They can use an on-screen name that does not identify who they are.
Thank you, Ms. Marks, for that clarification, and that's a helpful reminder for all of us. And also, I want to make a note that this webinar, or this meeting, I should say, is being recorded. So participants who wish to refer back to the conversations during this meeting can do so once the recording is posted online on our website and on DCA's different platforms. So thank you, Ms. Marks, for the clarification regarding identification, and we will go from there to see if anybody is interested in public comment for items not on the agenda.
Board President, no requests have been submitted for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. If you could go ahead and close the platform. So, oops, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just confirming that it has been closed. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Madam Moderator. All right, so just to provide folks a roadmap for today's hearing, what we're going to do is we're going to return back to items 11, and specifically for watch bills to finish, hopefully, our discussion on items O and P, as well as opening public comment for items that we did not discuss if there's public comment that wishes to bring any items to our attention related to these bills. The other things of note for today is that we will be going into closed session around noon to discuss some disciplinary matters, and we will appropriately let folks know when we go into closed session. We will aim and endeavor to return by about 1:15 and to finish the rest of the agenda. And our goal is to go about till 3 p.m. today. So that's a rough sketch for today, and for folks so they can plan accordingly, particularly for our participants who are tuning in and will be asked to step out of the virtual room for the closed session during that time. Do board members or staff have any questions about the road ahead for today? All right, seeing that. Oh, and the other thing I should mention is we will also try to take a break about every hour or so, about 5 minutes, so folks can grab what they need. So that's the timing for roughly the day for today. So with that, I would like to turn back to item 1130, AB 2704 by Assemblymember Ting. And I believe yesterday we left off with a motion by Ms. Cervantes, and I believe a second by Dr. Kasuga. And if I'm mistaken, Mr. Gage or Dr. Kasuga can correct me.
Just to correct, I believe Ms. Cervantes moved and Dr. Harpsheet seconded.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Gage. So it was moved by Mr. Vantes and seconded by Dr. Harbsheets to support this bill. And I think we will just open up for discussion and continue there. Are there any board members that would like to weigh in and have comments on the motion before us with regard to supporting this bill? Dr. Phillips.
Good morning. Yeah, I had one concern about the bill, and that is, again, this is kind of a conundrum because we do want to try to get as much demographic data as possible. I think I mentioned previously that I felt like if we were going to get demographic data, there are a variety of aspects of demographic data that aren't necessarily included here as to issues of identity, including sexual orientation. But my other concern, which is a conflicting concern, is that in asking people to identify themselves, particularly as it relates to gender identity, it may compromise the safety of some of our licensees. With the kind of rampant transphobia we've seen in the last few years, people who want to identify themselves as being trans or as being non-binary or gender fluid are going to have to, basically we're publishing a list of people that other people may choose to attack, whether that be physically or through other means. So if we're going to be consistent in this particular situation, I think it should be optional for people to identify their gender or gender identity. I know that cuts against the collection of demographic data, but I do think we should also have some concerns for the safety of our licensees.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Ms. Cervantes.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I've had a long history working in state government, and there is different occasions where the state collects demographic data and separates it from identity markers to individuals. We do that in education, we do that in public health. The Department of Finance has aggregate demographic information. In the language for this particular bill, the state identifies a need to address or anticipate workforce needs, and also the intention of agencies or state departments reporting information in the aggregate that doesn't connect to individuals. While I don't know all of the steps that the law would require for us to take, I'm comforted, at least knowing that we have practices in government that require that kind of confidentiality, and that the intention of this particular policy is to report in the aggregate for the purposes of anticipating workforce needs. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Ms. Cervantes. Dr. Phillips.
If that were true, obviously the concern that I've raised is not as salient to this conversation. So if it's just to collect the workforce data, I would suggest instead that the breadth of the data that they collect might be greater to include other aspects of identity to better help us understand the workforce. The intention is or if the intention had been to publish the information on the website along with the licensee's other data, I'd be much more concerned about that. But in looking back at the language of the statute, I don't think that's necessarily true. So I withdraw my objection, but I guess I'd bring forward a new suggestion, and that is that there could be other aspects of identity as to which we could collect data, such as sexual orientation, religious identification, all those types of things that would better help us to understand who our workforce is.
Dr. Phillips and Ms. Cervantes, if I may, I think what I'm hearing from this conversation is that perhaps there's a desire to support this bill amended to also include, perhaps after job satisfaction ratings under L, include sexual orientation and religious identifications for that consideration. Is that accurate, Dr. Phillips?
I would also include things such as whether somebody has a disability or a different ability, so that we can get as complete information as possible. I can't think through what all the permutations are in terms of aspects of identity. Might be relevant to ask about, and I don't know if it does, so excuse me if it does, but age would certainly be relevant, and it's certainly been a consideration as it relates to our licensees because we have a substantial number of older adults that work. Now that's information we can get elsewhere, but if we're going to get all the information in one place, I think that would be helpful. So I guess what I would say is I'd suggest that the author include a variety of aspects of data and then maybe do an including, but not limited to list.
Understood. So perhaps it's actually not conditioning our support on that, but as a part of our support, we convey these areas of consideration that are important also to develop a more holistic picture of the workforce.
And also how we serve those populations. As a healing art, how we serve those populations. I think that's valid. I think, and there are other places in state government where we ask those types of questions and report them in the aggregate. One of those is in public higher education. When students apply to universities, public universities in the state, they are asked, it's an optional question, but they are asked about sexual orientation. And the reason the state asked that, or asked the universities to do that, is to ensure that there was adequate services to different student populations. And so I share that because there's like the state does that in other places, and if as they're telling us the intent is planning workforce, it kind of brings it back together. I think that's that would be an appropriate ask of the state to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Cervantes. Ms. Marks?
Thank you, Mr. Phil. I just wanted to respond to a couple of the points that I think have already been resolved that relate to Dr. Phillips' question. One is that the bill says that the data may be collected at the time of application, but it doesn't have to, and it can be collected afterwards at the time of issuance of the license, and therefore can be relatively easily separated from the person, him or herself, or themselves. And as Mr. Cervantes pointed out, it does say that it's confidential and is only released in the aggregate. With respect to any other data points that the board may be interested in. The board could promulgate regulations that include those data points, collection of those data points, because it does say that the information at a minimum shall include, I think that gives the board the authority to collect additional data if it were not added to the bill. I think that if you were going to suggest additional data points being added, you might want to explain why that helps the overall picture of the workforce that is being formed by the data that's already being collected.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. If there's no further board discussion, I would like to turn this over. Oh, yes, Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, just one brief comment with Ms. Marks' comments in mind. If it allows us to include more data points than is provided for in the list, then I think we could probably just take a support position and then internal to the board make a decision as to what those data points are going to be.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I think at this time, not seeing additional board discussion, I'm going to ask that Madam Moderator open the public comment section so that we can ask for our public participants to share any input they may have.
This is the moderator. At the direction of the board, I've opened the Q&A feature for public comments. If you would like to make a comment, please click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I'm sharing the instructions on the screen for your reference. In the Ask field, typically located at the lower right of your WebEx screen, type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. Board President, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
It has been closed.
So Ms. Marks has weighed in. I'm curious if board staff have any thoughts as we move towards this direction. If Ms. Sorick or others on the call have any additional thoughts that perhaps the board should deliberate and contemplate before taking action on this?
Just as a follow-up, about a month ago, Ms. Cervantes and I had a conversation with OSHPD, and part of that discussion was the data points that they currently collect, and it was mentioned during that conversation that our board was not a board that was included on the list of boards that provide the volunteer information for the workforce data project. So I think that at least as far as being included in that volunteer survey, this bill would give our board the ability to participate in that program so that OSHPD could then, if they do share that data, even in the aggregate, be able to share that with us if this bill were to pass. So I just wanted to add that in as another point of reference on the collection.
Thank you, Ms. Sorick. And I think I should just point out, I think this bill is a 2-year bill because it's still in the Assembly and it wasn't heard in BMP committee. So it appears that there's still plenty of opportunity to inform its process since the House of Origins deadline for this year has passed. Is there additional board discussion on this item? And if not seeing any unmuted mics or hands raised. Seeing no objection, I'm going to ask that Mr. Gage call the roll for the motion before us by Ms. Cervantes and seconded by Dr. Hartsheets for the board to support this bill, and conveying to the author several other different information pieces that should be collected that Dr. Phillips referenced. Dr. Kusuga, I did see your mic go unmuted when I was speaking, so I just want to check in before we call the roll that if you want to make remarks, please go ahead.
Actually, I was just having my microphone on for the vote, but I think I have this platform. I'd like to say that I think there's a lot of value with collecting information that can be useful in us understanding our workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Kusuga. And actually, Mr. Gage, before you call the roll, can we, Dr. Hartsheets, can you try unmuting yourself? Did you just do a test to see if you're still connected? You briefly disappeared off my screen for a moment. I just want to make sure that I was, that any connection issues. It appears that Dr. Hartsheets is having technical difficulties accessing this platform and that she's no longer connected to the WebEx platform. Oh, Dr. Hartsheets, I see that you're unmuted. Are you back on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's funny because I can't even find the screen, but as long as I'm unmuted, I still can't find the actual screen for the meeting. It's very odd. Okay, I think I found it again. Okay, I'm all right.
All right, perfect. Okay, I think we're all set. Mr. Gage, let's roll.
Okay. Kusuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Hartsheets.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. All right, next item on the agenda is item P as in Peter, Senate Bill 806 by Senator Grove. Dr. Hartsheets, I believe you were the person who requested to discuss this item, so I will turn it over to you. And perhaps while Dr. Hartsheets pulls up the screen, Ms. Sorek, could you perhaps provide some background? Oh.
Sure. So this bill would repeal these statutory provisions. The bill would instead establish a new test that for purposes of specific provisions of the Labor Code governing the relationship of employer and employees, a person providing labor or services for remuneration is considered an employee rather than an independent contractor, unless the hiring entity demonstrates that the person is 1, free from the control and direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract for the performance of the work and in fact determined by a preponderance of factors, with no single factor of control being determinative, and either that 2, the person performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business, or the work performed is outside the place of business of the hiring entity, or the worker is responsible for the costs of the place of the business where the work is performed, or that 3, the person is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. The bill would apply the new test to all pending claims, whether in civil court or as an administrative action, filed on or after January 1, 2018, that relate to the classification of workers in this state. This bill is by Senator Grove, and right now it's in the Senate Committee on Labor, Public Employment, and Retirement, and it was on May 14th set for first hearing, and it failed passage in committee, but reconsideration has been granted.
Thank you, Ms. Sorek. Dr. Hartsheets?
Okay, so my what I would like to understand better is it seems that this bill would provide a more liberal test to determine who would be seen as independent contractors versus employees. And it seemed also that those categories of employment who received exemptions under AB 5, including psychologists, that would no longer be relevant because this would sort of supersede that. And so I'm wondering if staff or anybody else could, or the LEDGE committee could say a little bit more if my interpretation is correct and how that might affect psychologists, because if we, obviously if we lose a lot of psychologists because of limitations, for example, in agencies no longer being able to work as independent contractors, I worry about being able to provide service to the consumers in this state.
Just a note that we did watch this bill as we watched AB 5, and this is really a direct employment issue that the staff just wanted to watch and see where it went. I know that there is an initiative to address some of this that should be on the November ballot, so I don't know how that would interact with this bill and or the existing AB 5. So I hate to continue to defer to Dr. Winkleman, but this is definitely more of probably a CPA watch bill than something that directly impacts Board of Psychology.
Ms. Lorick, thank you for that. And so I'm going to then ask that Madam Moderator, please open public comment for any public comment on this item. And I think if possible, since Ms. Lorick invited Dr. Winkleman to provide clarity, if Dr. Winkleman, oh, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Winkleman, for conveying you would like to comment. Madam Moderator, please unmute her line.
This is the moderator. I will be unmuting Elizabeth's microphone now. You have been unmuted.
Hi, thank you. This is Elizabeth Winkleman from CPA. Just to clarify that psychologists are already exempt from this under the current version of the law, and this would not change it as far as I understand, and CPA does not have a position on this bill. So currently and under current law and also under this bill, psychologists are treated as independent contractors or employees the same way they have been for the past 30 years. So if I'd be glad to, if you could keep me unmuted if there are any other questions, because it's a little bit of a tricky area, I'd be glad to give more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman.
Okay.
Dr. Harpsheets, do you have additional questions?
Oh, from my quick reading of it, it seemed like the information was saying that any previous exemptions would somehow disappear in the face of this more liberal interpretation. And my biggest concern, as I'm sure this was CPA's concern, is that if psychologists weren't exempted, we would severely limit the ability to treat, the availability of services to California consumers, psychological services. And that was my biggest concern about this. So it seems like it deems continued watching.
Yes, and this is Elizabeth Winkleman again. We have been monitoring this closely because, of course, we have exactly the same concerns that Dr. Harpsheets has mentioned, and we want to make sure that our exemption is maintained.
Is there additional public comment on this item? All right.
Board President, no additional requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. Bringing it back to the board, Dr. Harpsheets, it sounds like that you'd like this bill to be kept on watch. It will remain so as a part of this list, and it will appear again in November for our board meeting. Do you have additional questions or comments, Dr. Harpsheets? And I know Ms. Marks also has some comments too.
Okay, yeah, no, that discussion satisfies what my questions were. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Marks?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Fu, Mr. Fu. I can't speak to whether or not the bill would have an impact on the workforce. I don't know what individuals would decide to do based on how they are characterized. My understanding of the bill is to return the analysis back to pre-Dynamex, which is to say that there were a number of factors that were to be considered to determine whether or not somebody was an employee or an independent contractor for certain purposes. So I don't know that it would mean a psychologist are not exempt. I think the analysis would just return to what it had been for Dynamex, and Dynamex very much limited that analysis. So hopefully that helps. Again, I can't speak to whether or not it would have an impact on someone's employment and how they decided to, or what setting they decide to work at, depending on how they are characterized.
Thank you, Ms. Marks. All right, seeing no further board discussion, I think Dr. Harpsheets, your hand's still up, but I think you expressed that you were satisfied with the discussion already. So I'm gonna assume that is a artifact.
It is an artifact. I'm not sure why it's still up.
No worries.
Yeah.
All right. So seeing no further board discussion, we will now move on. And so I'm going to ask that unless board members have additional bills they want for discussion, which I don't see, I'm going to ask that Madam Moderator open it up for public comment for the remaining items on the watch list that weren't discussed by board members.
This is the moderator. I have opened the Q&A feature, the direction of the board. If you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I'm sharing the instructions on the screen for reference. In the ask field, type in, I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. Board President, no requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we've dispensed with item number 11. We are now going to take up item 12. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right agenda. So item 12, legislative items for future meeting. As noted, the board may discuss other items of legislation in sufficient detail to determine whether such items should be on a future board meeting and or whether to hold a special meeting of the board to discuss such items. I should mention that our next board meeting in November will be after the legislative session. So if you do have items for this, it may not have any action items for us to meet the current legislative timeline, unless, of course, it's a 2-year bill. Dr. Kasuga.
Thank you, President Fu. I just wanted to suggest that we track and maybe evaluate or consider supporting SB 855 by Senator Winner. It's the health coverage for mental health or substance abuse disorder. So basically, I believe this bill is going to allow for coverage for medically necessary treatment of mental health and substance abuse disorders under the same terms and conditions applied to medical conditions. So basically, it will help create parity in healthcare. So I think that it's worth looking at.
Thank you, Dr. Kasuga. Other board members who have items they may add? All right, so well, Dr. Kasuga, in relation to your comment, I think if it's appropriate, we'll add it to the watch list and have staff take a look at it. And then if staff offers recommendation to the Ledge Affairs Committee, we can see if we need to have a meeting before September. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. So because we can't discuss it today, we'll go ahead and ask staff to take a look at it and then reach out to see if we need to agendize for the Ledge Affairs Committee to take a look before the end of the year. Madam Moderator, can you open public comment to see if there's any other items that folks would like to add to future, potentially add to future meetings?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A feature has been opened. If you would like to make a comment, type "I would like to make a comment" in the ask field and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to.
All right, Madam Moderator. We're on the same timing. I love it. Okay, go ahead and close.
Okay.
All right, so we'll now take up, oh, actually, I'm gonna, to wrap this up for board discussion, I don't see any other board discussion, but without objection, we'll go ahead and add Dr. Kasuga's request for that item. So we will now turn to item 13, the enforcement report. We'll turn it over to you, Ms. Monterrubio.
Thank you, Mr. President. Attached to the agenda item 13 is also the overview of enforcement activity, which conveys the complaint, investigation, and discipline statistics for the current fiscal year. So currently we have 2 vacancies in the enforcement program. One of them is our office technician position and an enforcement analyst. The OT opens complaints and assigns cases to experts and provides office support to enforcement staff. The analyst performs desk investigations and works closely with the Division of Investigation and refers cases to the Office of the Attorney General for formal discipline. We're actively looking to recruit for the enforcement technician position. Hopefully we can have that filled within the next 90 days. But the analyst position will remain vacant until February 2021. Since July 1st, 2019, we have received 1,092 complaints, and all complaints are received and opened and assigned to an enforcement analyst. Since July of 2019, we have issued 35 enforcement citations. We have referred 75 cases to the Office of the Attorney General for formal discipline, and we are currently monitoring 45 probationers, and of the 45 probationers, 1 is out of compliance. And that is my report. If there's any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio. Dr. Kasuga.
Hi, Ms. Monterrubio. I just wanted to ask if the 1,092 complaints that are received, are they all unique, or some of them are complaints about the same person?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of your question.
I was just wondering if the 1,092 complaints that were received by the board, are those unique complaints, or are some of those pertaining to the same, like, are there duplicates there, or multiple complaints about the same person?
I would definitely say that of the 1,092 complaints, there are most likely complaints that are filed regarding the same subject. I don't have a breakdown of how many, but we definitely do see complaints come in regarding the same licensee from several complainants. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions from board members about the enforcement report? Dr. Herbsheets.
Hi. Ms. Monterrubio, would it be difficult to sort out the numbers that Dr. Kasuga was asking about, multiple complaints against the same license? Would it be difficult to gather that information?
Hi, Dr. Herbsheets. No, it wouldn't. We've actually done that before at a prior board meeting. It'll take a little more time, but we can definitely have those statistics available for the November meeting, if that's what you would like.
I would appreciate that. I think it would be interesting to know, to give us a little better perspective on what that 1,092 represents.
Not a problem.
Thank you so much.
Any additional questions on the enforcement report? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Madam Moderator to open it up for public comment. And also, when we do open this up, I do want to note that there is also an enforcement committee report, which is different. So if folks have questions related to the enforcement committee report, to save your comments for that presentation, and for your comments to be pertinent to the enforcement report that Ms. Monterrubio just spoke to. Is there public comment? And Madam Moderator, thanks for opening up the platform.
Yes, this is the moderator. If you would like to make a comment, type I would like to make a comment in the ask field and send it to all panelists. And I do see the hand raising features being used by members of the public. Just a friendly reminder, the hand raising feature is being used by the board members and staff to facilitate discussion of agenda items. If you are interested in making a public comment, if you can please click on the question mark that is located inside a square, and that you can find by hovering your mouse over the bottom center of your WebEx screen. Thank you. I have individual identified as Catherine Campbell who would like to make a public comment. Catherine, I have unmuted your microphone now.
Thank you. I have a question. Of the 1,000, I'm not sure if this is showing up on this report or the next report, but because I couldn't find it in the handouts. But what is the average time for complaints to go through? And are we below where you were trying to be? Because they were taking so long, we have brought up the fact that the complaints seem to be taking longer than it should, and it can take years. And in the meantime, that evaluator is working with children who has dismissed abuse, including sexual abuse. So that means we have children who are living with a sexual abuser, and when people come to your board to report that there is no help given, and that person is being able to continue to see other people. Like, we're getting into a Larry Nassar situation. So I'm wondering if you can tell me if you have improved the time, and what is the average time for something to go through.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Sorry, Ms. Monterrubio. I'm going to ask that we ask all the public comments to come through, and then we can then group all the answers for you at the end. How does that sound, just for management of process? So is there additional public comment?
Board President, no additional requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Go ahead and do that. And then Ms. Monterrubio, could you speak to the timeline, and I think to Ms. Campbell's question? I also think I suspect she was alluding to the performance management quality measures in her reference to that. So Ms. Monterrubio?
So yes, unfortunately, our timeframes have not improved, and cases can take a significant amount of time to complete. I just want to remind the board members and the public that when complaints are submitted to the board, We do open every complaint within 10 days, as we are mandated to do, and we send out an acknowledgement letter to the complainant. We do work closely with the Division of Investigation that has field offices throughout the state of California, and we work with the Office of the Attorney General as well as Office of Administrative Hearings. So there is so much that board staff can do in regards to the process of complaints. What we can do is open a complaint in a timely manner, review and perform a desk investigation, and that is in fact what we do. We work with our experts. So we refer a case out to an expert for him or her to opine as to whether or not there is a departure. If there is, and we need to have a formal investigation, we will send that out to the Division of Investigation. Again, the Division of Investigation works for most of the boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs, not just the Board of Psychology. So they then have to triage the complaints that they receive. They do have some staff shortages, which I think is going to impact how quickly they're able to work a case. Once they have completed their investigation, which can take a significant amount of time, it's then possible that the case is going to be looked at by an expert again, once all of the evidence has been collected, and then he or she will opine as to whether or not there's a departure. If there is, it's then referred to the Office of the Attorney General for a pleading of an accusation. Again, there's offices throughout the state of California for the Office of the Attorney General. We send those cases over. Again, we would expect that they also have to prioritize and triage the cases that are being sent to them by all the different boards. And then if it needs to go to a hearing, it's going to be referred over to Office of Administrative Hearings to put on calendar. And again, if they have a backlog or if they have a significant amount of cases that they have to hear, all of this is going to prolong cases. And some of these controls are outside of the board's control. We don't have really a lot of say over how long it's going to take the Attorney General's office to plead an accusation or to get it on calendar. We don't have a lot of say as to how long it's going to take the Division of Investigation to complete their investigation. What I can let you know is that enforcement staff is constantly contacting our investigators for status updates on our cases, and we do get cases out as quickly as we can once we've completed our desk investigation. So again, our timeframes unfortunately have not improved, but to adjudicate a case, yes, it can unfortunately take a couple of years.
Thank you, Ms. Monty. I think we have the benefit of having Deputy Attorney General Joshua Temple on the line. Mr. Temple, would you like to make any comments to answer the question or reflect on what Ms. Monterrubio just said?
Mr. Fu, I don't have much to add. I think that a investigation through prosecution, through adjudication, follows before the board at a few meetings. So I think the board and the public who have attended those meetings are familiar with the components of the process. And I guess I just remind the public about this particular question. Of course, we have tools to use for emergency cases where we have clear evidence of immediate threats to people. And so the board can pursue an interim suspension order on a very tight timeline to suspend the license of a licensee who's posing an imminent threat to the public. So that's the tool really that person had in mind, and board enforcement staff are well aware of that tool, and we use it as we need to. I think that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there board members with questions? Mr. Temple? I don't see anybody. I guess I do have one question. Independent of our board investigation and the investigation that the AG's office may be pursuing, Child Welfare Services is operating on its own as well and could remove a child at their discretion if they are detecting issues on their end. I'm not sure that's a question to Mr. Temple or to Ms. Monterrubio, but
I don't have any knowledge of those procedures, so maybe Ms. Monterubio has.
Ms. Monterubio?
Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't unmuted. No, I don't have any information on what you had just mentioned, President Vu.
Thank you. All right. So seeing no further board members with questions or staff with questions, we will turn to item 14, the licensing report. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Fu. Including in your meeting materials, we have provided the license registration data by fiscal year. So compared to the last board meeting, we have observed a slight increase in our licensee for psychologists, a little drop on psychological assistant registrations, as well as registered psychologist registrations. And then if you continue to go to the attachment of the report, you will find the 3 workload reports for the 3 types of registrations. We have observed similar trends as previously reported in the board meeting in February. In attachment C, we have seen an overall slight decrease in the month of May regarding the total new application received. And I would also like to bring the board's attention to the psychological assistant bar graphs. We have added the bar graphs for notifications received for the psychological assistant registrations. These bar graphs is meant to display the volume of notification received when a psychological assistant would like to request to change a primary supervisor. And they go through the same process of reviewing an application. So first we are wanting to show the volume regarding that process. On the examination statistics, in the material, it was provided up to April at the time of the report was generated. So in April, we have observed a drop in the decrease in number of candidates taking the exam due to limited testing capacity. So just right before the meeting, we were provided updated statistics for May and June on both exams by our examination coordinator, Ms. Snyder. So even though we have seen the drop in candidates in April for both exams, so in May we have observed that the candidates number actually have climbed back up to comparable to previous months before April. And we have also observed increase in overall pass rate and first timer for EPPP exam in May. And then for complete, we have observed a similar trend in passing rate compared to previously, but there is a good passing rate of around 80% for overall pass rate and first timers in the month of June. And that's the end of the report, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chung. Are there questions from board members? All right, seeing no questions or comments, I'm going to ask Madam Moderator to please open up the public comment section.
This is the moderator. I've opened the Q&A feature on the request of the board. If you would like to make a comment, type "I would like to make a comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
please. Thank you. All right, bring it back to the board. Is there any additional comments from the board members or questions? All right, seeing none. The hour being 11, we will go ahead and take our promised break for about 5 or so minutes, and we'll look to come back around 11:05, 11:06, depending on which time you're looking at on your clock. So the board will be on a brief break until 11:05-ish. All right, good morning, everyone. So we're returning back from our brief break. So we will now turn to item 15, Continuing Education and Renewals Report. And I'm going to ask Ms. Sorick, Mr. Thomas to do this. Mr. Thomas?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Fu. So as you can see in the memo in your board meeting materials, that we currently have sent out the CE audits through the renewal period of March of 2019. March of 2019. We're currently in the process of getting those reviewed and finalized. You can see in attachment A and attachment B that we still have some pending audits, and for the 2019 pending audits, some of those are still in the process of being reviewed. In 2018, we still have 20 pending audits, which part of our review process is in addition to reviewing the materials that were submitted, we do contact the providers if there's a question regarding whether or not they are an approved CE provider, or if a specific course was live or not. So those are the pending audits. Our current goal is to send out the remainder of the 2019 period by September. So we'll be hopefully caught up to 2020 soon. And as far as renewals, an average so far in 2020, an average of 920 renewal applications are processed per month, with 79% of psychologists renewing as active, and approximately 81% of psychologists and psych assistants renew online. And another note, the pass rate from 2014 to 17 has been consistently over 80%, and the pass rate for second audits has risen from 68% in 2016 to 82% in 2018. So that's a good trend. And also included as an attachment is a sample of the renewal postcard that we are sending out in lieu of the old paper renewals in our effort for Paperlight. And that is my report. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any questions from board members? All right, not seeing none. If we could ask the moderator to go ahead and open up the public comment section.
I have opened up the public comment section down in the lower right-hand corner. You will see that there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, it will allow you to type in, "I would like to make a comment" in the comment field, and be sure that you're sending it to all panelists. We'll go ahead and pause while you go ahead and do that. At this point, I do not see any public comments. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we will now turn to item 16 for regulatory, any additional board comments? Any questions? Seeing none, we'll take up item 16, regulatory update. I think this is you, Mr. Thomas, is that correct?
This is actually for me. I'll take this one.
All right, sorry. Mr. Glass was absent because we're so fond of him that we don't know who to turn to when he's not here to present these items. For the confusion. Sorry.
Thank you.
No problem. So included in your meeting materials is a list of the status updates for the current regulatory packages that the board is working with the department on. you'll see that all of them are in the initial review phase, which includes a review by the Department of Consumer Affairs, Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as Department of Finance. The only one that is proceeding any further right now is the regulations to implement AB 2138 regarding substantial relationship criteria for purposes of consideration for application for licensure. That package is currently at Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency before it's ultimately submitted to Office of Administrative Law. The board had a hearing on this, and we're actually in the kind of official process once it's submitted to OAL. So that is the update on regulations.
Questions from board members? All right, seeing none, can we ask for public comment, please, Mr. Moderator?
The public comment is open in the lower right-hand corner. You'll see the question mark icon in the lower bottom of your screen. If you would like to make a comment, please type in, "I would like to make a comment," and make sure that you're sending it to all panelists, and we'll go ahead and pause while you do so. At this particular point, I see no public comments. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, returning back, board members. Seeing no further comment, we will close this item. All right, so where we are going now is that because we were quicker than I thought we would be in terms of moving through these items, we will go into closed session for starting now and through the lunch hour. And I will still keep the time approximate return to about 1 p.m. To come back to take up the remaining items on the agenda for the rest of the day. So what we will do is the board will now meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11-126C3 to discuss disciplinary matters, including proposed decisions, stipulations, petitions for reconsideration, and remands. The board will return from closed session approximately 1 p.m. If you are an attendee of this meeting, you will now be asked to leave and be asked, meaning that the moderators will close the public participation portion, and also board staff members to please leave if you're not participating in closed session. We will come back at 1 p.m. back into open session. So we'll give folks a couple minutes to appropriately set the new setup.
If you are an attendee of this meeting, if you could go ahead and log out, we will be going into closed session. And if you are still in the meeting, we will probably be expelling you during this particular time.
All right. So I think we're going to pass this, our solid colleagues will pass this to Stephanie. So give folks some time to do that. And then we need to find Noreen, because Noreen has disappeared from this, so I'll text her.
Disappear again.
Perfect. I can see that I'm now the presenter.
I'm going to go ahead and pass you the host as well.
Okay.
And what that means is that you're going to be able to restrict and unrestrict access. So if Noreen is, whoops, sorry. I just passed you completely out of the meeting. I'm used to making people attendees. So what I'm going to do, you there, change you over to host.
Okay, I see that.
See the host as well. What will happen when Noreen needs, if she's ready to come in, you can go up to events, and under events, you're going to see restore access.
Okay.
She'll come in as an attendee.
Gotcha.
So you see the attendee number 0, we'll go to attendee number 1, and open that blue link that's down there, and you can just click on her name, and there's a button that says make panelist.
Okay, so right now under event, I am seeing restore access. Does it mean that we're in restrict mode right now?
You're in restricted right now.
Gotcha.
So what you would do is you would then open it up so you could get her in, promote her, and then restrict it again.
Got it.
Yeah, it toggles between restrict access and restore access.
Got it.
Cool.
Noreen just messaged me and said that she's trying to log on and the meeting is closed. So
let's do event and restore access. And
Okay,
we'll look
I'll
for her
do
to come into
restore
the
access.
attendee. And then if, Sayron, if you can go ahead and ask her to try and log in again, we'll see her pop into the attendee list and we should be able to promote her.
all right, so I just let her know she's going to try again.
Okay. And she may come directly into the panelist if she was a panelist also.
So she's trying now.
Okay.
I see her name.
There we go. So we want to usually there. She's going to bring her there. There's your microphone. Noreen, can you go ahead and test out your microphone for us?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay.
So at this point, what you would want to do is restrict access again.
Okay. All right, I did it. It says the meeting event is locked.
Right, and you do not want this recorded, correct? So as you go into closed session, you do not want it recorded?
Noreen, do we want this recorded?
No, we would not want this recorded.
No.
Because we don't record it when we don't record it when we're live, do we?
Yeah, down on your command buttons, you're going to see there's a record button. And when you click on that, there's a pause and there's a stop. If you can hit pause, then we can just continue the rest of the open session on one recording. Otherwise, we'll have two.
Okay, so I see that there's like a little red button, say recording is in progress. Open the recorder to manage recording. So I'll just click on that.
Go ahead and click on that, and there will be a pause button and a stop button. If
Gotcha.
you pause it, it'll stop the recording. If we stop it, we'll have two separate recordings for day 2.
Okay, I will pause it right now.
Perfect. Turning from our closed session meeting back into open session, this is Sayron Fu, board member of the Board of Psychology. Because we're coming back from closed session, and just for the benefit of the public, I think we're going to go ahead and just reestablish quorum here in open session for this purpose. Mr. Gage, could you go ahead and please call the roll to reestablish quorum for open session?
Certainly. Kazuga.
Here.
Cervantes.
Here.
Fu.
Here.
Harbsheets.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Tate.
Here.
Quorum established.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. We're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to start off with item 19, enforcement of committee report. And for any audience members joining us this afternoon, we did cover item 18 and 17 already in advance earlier this morning. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Phillips, Chair of the Enforcement Committee. maybe I'll turn it over to Ms. Monterrubio, and then we'll see what happens.
Thank you, President Vu. The Enforcement Committee met in May 2020 to review the attached Child Custody Stakeholder Meeting Implementation Plan. And this is just an update, but items 1, 2, 3, and 4 have been completed. The committee did discuss item 5, but determined that additional information was needed for further discussion. So we will be discussing item 5 at our next Enforcement Committee meeting. There is no action required on this item. It's for informational purposes only.
So I think that there may be public comment that wants to be made on this topic. I believe that at least one stakeholder has expressed such interest. So could we open the comment box? Mr. Moderator.
Yes, this is the moderator. I will open the Q&A feature at the request of the board. The Q&A feature has been opened, and I will go through the instructions here since we are back from closed session. Members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on the icon with the question mark located at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. I'm sharing the instructions on your screen for your reference. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen, type, I would like to make a public comment, and send it to all panelists. Any other communication will not be responded to. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for the members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comment. This is not a means to ask questions of the moderator or members of the board. Such inquiries will not be answered. And just a reminder, it's not necessary to identify yourself in order to make a public comment, and we will be taking the comments in the order that they are received.
And just to add to that, anticipating that there may be some lengthy comments, we will be limiting the comments to 5 minutes. Although I'm seeing no comments. Madam Moderator, I think we can close the question and answer box. It does not appear anyone's volunteering any comments.
Thank you. It has been closed.
Thank you very much. The next item we're going to move to is 19, back to my 19B, proposed amendments to regulations. And again, I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Monterrubio to summarize where we stand with these things.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. For 19B, attached are the disciplinary guidelines. The areas highlighted in yellow reflect the implementation language for AB 2138. The implementation language for AB 2138 has already been approved by the board. The Department of Consumer Affairs coordinated a substance abuse coordination committee made up of executive officers from different programs. The committee agreed to amendments regarding testing frequency and tests when a probationer returns from travel. Those are also highlighted on page 25 and 44 of the document. The committee did review the highlighted changes at our enforcement committee meeting in May and approved the changes. So at this time, the board is just being asked to approve the highlighted areas. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone that has comments with respect to the proposed regulatory changes, both as to AB 2138 and as to the substance abusing language?
I would move that the board amend the highlighted changes to the CCR sections and uniform standard language as attached in this item.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? Is there any public comment? Again, Madam Moderator, if we could open the comment box.
This is the moderator, has been open on the request of the board. Simply a reminder, if you would like to make a comment, type I would like to make a comment in the ask box and send it to all panelists.
And this is Evan here. Could I get confirmation on who seconded?
Dr. Tate.
Yes, that's correct.
No requests were submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
If you would, please, I would appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any further board discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Gage, could you please call the roll on the motion?
Certainly.
Dr. Phillips, this is Noreen. Could I ask a clarification on what the motion is again?
Mr. Fu?
Absolutely. The motion is to adopt the recommendation from the Enforcement Committee related to the highlighted changes to the CCR section and uniform standard language as attached in item 19B.
Okay, and then just to go back to Ms. Monterrubio's discussion of these changes will just get rolled into the language for the disciplinary guidelines when that matter gets noticed for a regulatory change. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh.
Are we ready to take roll, or did you need further clarification, Ms. Marks?
No, I just wanted to make sure. I'm sorry, I may have missed part of Ms. Monterrubio's statement because I am also toggling back and forth between different screens about whether or not it was clear that this will just be part of whatever the regulatory proposal is at the time the disciplinary guidelines are noticed for update.
Yeah, it's important clarification. I appreciate it. Mr. Gage, could you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Yes. Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harbsheets.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, well, we're moving. The next item is item number 19C, which is a review and consideration of the Enforcement Committee goal and name. This is not, I'll take this one, Ms. Monterrubio, not a particularly exciting item, but obviously an important one given that we've been reconstituting the committees under new names and clarifying their goals. In this particular circumstance, we're suggesting we keep our names. It's already a short and pithy name that covers our purpose and function. But we did add some language to the revised goal for the committee. That's the underscored language in the memo. And it just clarifies the fact that the committee also provides feedback for the expert reviewer program. Would anyone like to make a motion, or is there any board comment?
I just have a question. When the committee provides feedback, are they providing feedback on a specific case or about the program overall?
It's an interesting question. We do discuss the expert reviewer program in the context of our meetings from time to time, although typically that information always comes back to the board. This was more in light of the fact that sometimes in closed session we have questions and need clarification regarding expert opinions that have been rendered on behalf of the board. We like to go back and provide the feedback from the board as a whole as to particular expert reviewers or as to systemic problems we're noticing. So it's just a feedback loop to the enforcement staff from the board relative to particular expert reviewers or issues related to expert reviewers.
Thank you. That clarifies for me. So I will make the motion that we adopt this change recommended or requested by the enforcement committee that they add this wording that is underlined to their goal.
I second.
Is there any board discussion? Is there any public comment?
This is the moderator. I've opened the Q&A feature on the direction of the board. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, type "I would like to make a comment" in the Ask field, typically located at the lower right of your screen, and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay. And next in line is 19D 1 through 12, the statutory and regulatory update. Again, and Ms. Monterrubio, feel free to interject if you need to.
Was there a vote on? Was there a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, there was no vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Mr. Gage, on the preceding item, could you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Kasuga.
Aye.
Cervantes.
Aye.
Fu.
Aye.
Harpsheet.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Tate.
Aye.
Motion passes.
My apologies, I was getting ahead of myself at the case of Friday afternoon itis. So the final item as part of the Enforcement Committee report is item 19D 1 through 12. It's a statutory and regulatory update, review, and consideration of additional changes. Let me describe this process with you a little bit, and feel free to interject, Ms. Monterrubio, as you see appropriate. Basically, we're going through all the statutes and regulations that relate to the enforcement function, so we can come back to board with proposed changes, and both for sake of clarity and for sake of the organization of the statutes and regulations. That process is ongoing. We commenced that process at the last Enforcement Committee meeting, and we'll continue to do so at our next Enforcement Committee meeting, which I believe is in Ms. Monterrubio's in September?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's really nothing substantive to report here. It's just to apprise you of the fact that we are in the middle of that review process. It was agendized, I guess, in anticipation of the fact that we might be able to report back, but that's overly optimistic. We have a fair amount of material to cover, so hopefully we'll be able to cover a substantial portion more of it in our next meeting. And obviously, ultimately, we will report back out to the board as to any proposals or suggestions. Is there any board discussion or questions as it relates to this item? Hearing none, Madam Moderator, could you open the Q&A box so that we can hear any public comment?
Yes, this is the moderator. The Q&A box has been opened, the direction of the board. For members of the public, a reminder, the hand-raising feature is being reserved for the board members and staff to facilitate discussion of agenda items. If you are interested in participating in public comments, submit your request. I would like to make a public comment by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your WebEx screen. It's a question mark located inside a square in one of the icons. You hover the mouse over, and I see that you found it. So I'll pause there with the instructions, and I will call on Kathleen Campbell. Your microphone has been unmuted.
Hi, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had a question about number 9 and 10 and 12, the violations that are made by the licensee. I am just not sure how these, I think everyone has a process, and I see clearly you have a process, and for years I've been hearing about the process, but we also know for years that abuse has been unsubstantiated. And I mean, to the earlier point of if there was a problem, there's an immediate action to be taken. And I think that it's important for us to see how many times an immediate action was be taken, because I honestly have known of cases where there was no immediate action taken, and these licensees were allowed to practice, and some are put on probation, and yet if they show their credentials and they show that they're on probation to someone, they can still work. I mean, we have firsthand knowledge of people who had no license and they were practicing. So why do we think that they would show someone their papers? I think it's important that the board realizes we're at a precipice of change. And I'm not sure if all that you've done from the stakeholders meeting is bringing the change that's needed. And I'm worried about the discipline that I see like in number 9 and the failures that are happening. I just see that it is a time that we need institutional courage. And if you aren't aware that there is someone who has put together an a Center for Institutional Courage, and I would think that we would need to look at that you would as a board, and I would appreciate that as a member of the public, that we are doing everything to change a culture, because even with the process that you have put together, people are slipping through and abuse is being dismissed. So I think at that point, a lot of the things that I'm able to read here are not showing me how that is shifting. I'm not seeing the shift. I'm seeing, when I saw that you were changing things from the parental alienation syndrome to just parental alienation syndrome and not just parental alienation, that was something that we let you know that none of that should be acceptable. And yet I feel as if you think it's okay to make that acceptable, to just say, oh, just parental alienation. And when none of that is okay. So I'm not sure that when the stakeholders meeting happened, that the true sense of what needed to come of that is coming through this. So I just want you to know that that's how I see this, and that's how the public sees it. And I think the board needs to be more open. And I know you're having less meetings, and one time that the enforcement report was taken off on one of your meetings, and I know there's the issues with the budget and how there were budget issues, so now you have maybe less meetings. But this is very important. I mean, we have realized that your licensees are unethical, and they're still allowed to practice, and the actions that are taken by the board seem to dismiss. So I need to let you know that I don't see that item number 19D 1 through 12 is really making a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, item 19D is really related to a process that we're going through as a board as a whole in order to address inconsistencies or to make more uniform the use of language, make more understandable the statutes and regulations. But I very much appreciate your feedback, and we're certainly aware of your concern relative to parental alienation as opposed to parental alienation syndrome. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment?
This is the moderator. There's an individual identified as Kathleen Russell. I may have miscommunicated previously. That was Catherine Campbell. So at this moment, I'm going to unmute Kathleen Russell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that was Catherine Campbell speaking earlier, and I am Kathleen Russell, the Executive Director of the Center for Judicial Excellence. And I did sign off. President Fu said that the meeting would reconvene at 1:15. And so I'm a bit shocked to see that this agenda item relating to the stakeholder meeting, which was convened in response to our organization's concerns, which have been raised in front of this body for 3 years or 4 years now, because we do want to raise issues, and I assume that the board has already adopted the implementation timeline. I missed that entire discussion because it was jammed through before 1:15. But we do have concerns about item 2 relating to the board cowing to the California Psychological Association and adding the word syndrome. As I know board member Phillips just mentioned, you're aware of the concerns, so I don't know if that was changed, but parental alienation syndrome has been a term and a concept in disrepute for decades. No one of any credibility in the forensic psychology field has used the term parental alienation syndrome since the creator of that concept committed suicide, Dr. Richard Gardner, by stabbing himself in the heart 7 times with the kitchen knife. That term has no credibility. It's not being used in the courts or by psychologists. But on the other hand, parental alienation is a thriving industry within the field of psychology. So this board has changed the original decision that was made at your April 26th and 27th, 2019 meeting because of pressure by the CPA to essentially water down this provision to be meaningless. And I did have a few questions about the question that you're adding to the subject matter expert questionnaire or application, I guess. And it is, you say that it's, do you believe parental alienation syndrome should be included in the DSM? Why or why not? Depending on the answer given, further review will be undertaken on a case-by-case basis. I understand that this question has already been added to the application, but my questions for the board and the enforcement committee are, what would this further review look like? Who will conduct the further review? And what would the potential outcomes be when you state on a case-by-case basis? This whole stakeholder meeting process appears to me to have run off the rails since last October's board meeting. And it's very concerning because, as my colleague Catherine Campbell mentioned, the issues surrounding parental alienation in the family courts, which your licensees are very much dealing with and influencing for judges, are involving the sexual abuse of young children and courts forcing children into these harmful environments because psychologists are steeped in this junk science, which is very problematic. So the board has punted its opportunity to do something meaningful here. And while we appreciate that you're adding in criteria for training, additional training in domestic violence and child sexual abuse for your subject matter experts, the fact that this whole process operates in secret and behind closed doors is deeply troubling, particularly in light of the Reuters investigation, which came out over the last few days and is continuing, about the need for oversight agencies to operate with complete transparency. And the fact that the enforcement committee doesn't even have its meeting dates on your website, which I've brought up time and time again, and these decisions get rammed through before the stakeholders are even on the call, is very concerning. And I did also want to mention, President Fu mentioned earlier that child welfare services can remove a child from a dangerous home. That is actually not always the case, and often if a custody evaluation has been ordered by the court, judges will often make decisions based on that custody evaluation alone, and that carries a tremendous amount of weight. So I know that no one had the answer earlier when President Fu made that comment, and so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I did want to clarify a couple of things. One was that although the committee did discuss this change in language, that change was brought back to a subsequent board meeting and discussed at that board meeting. So while I respect your position, the suggestion that this hasn't been publicly discussed is incorrect. It actually happened a board meeting or two ago, and maybe possible that you weren't present at that board meeting. I do believe that, and I forget the woman's last name, I believe her first name's Connie, was brought back into the room for purposes of that discussion, although I don't know that she made any particular contribution to the discussion. My understanding was that we were reconvening at 1 o'clock. I think if you listen to the recording of today's session, I think it'll be consistent with that relative to when Mr. Fu said we were going to reconvene. But be that as it may, is there any further comment from the public?
This is the moderator. No further requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. And thank you very much for that feedback. Okay, so I believe that brings us to the end of the discussion. Was there anything further you wanted to add, Ms. Monterrubio?
No, Dr. Phillips.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and that completes the Enforcement Committee report.
Dr. Phillips, this is Mr. Fu. Can I go ahead and ask a couple questions related to the Enforcement Committee report?
Absolutely.
So just for some clarifying questions to help me understand what's before us and what was shared. Ms. Monterrubio, if a person's practicing without a license, if someone was aware of this, they would file a complaint through the various mediums that the board offers for that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is practicing without a psychology license a violation of our laws and regulations with regard to the board?
Yes, it is.
Have we taken action in the past based on complaints with regard to those practicing without a license?
We have, and in fact, because we don't have a way to discipline somebody who doesn't have a license, we can issue a citation and fine and work directly with the local district attorney's office.
That's helpful. And I know we don't have our probation officer here, but maybe you can help me answer this question. If a licensee is on probation, they are required to have supervision from a psychologist with a free and clear license. Is that correct?
If that is part of their terms and conditions, that they are required to have a supervised practice, yes, it would be by a licensed psychologist in good standing.
And a probationer is required to disclose to an employer of their probationary status. Is that correct?
Yes, there's actually a term and condition that says notice to employer. So what they do is they provide the discipline document to that employer. So he or she is aware of why the individual may have restrictions on their license.
So a public or private employer would know that they are essentially engaging in a professional relationship with a probationer.
That's correct.
Unless they didn't satisfy that term of the probation. I mean, we can make the probation condition, and optimally everyone does do that, but it's possible that they wouldn't have disclosed and then that would become a probation violation.
Right. So if it's a part of their probationary terms, which sounds like it's standard, and if they don't disclose, they would then face further disciplinary action from the board because they would be in violation of their terms and conditions. That's really helpful, Ms. Monterrubio, for just illuminating the process for me. I do have a question for Ms. Sorick. Ms. Sorick, are we on track for having our standard 4 board meetings for this calendar year?
Yes.
Could you just recount for us the meetings that we've had so far and when our 4th meeting will be?
Sure. We had a meeting in February, a meeting in April. We are having a meeting now in July, and then we will have a meeting in November. So that will be 4 total board meetings.
And this is consistent with practice of at least the last 3 years of having 4 board meetings a year, if not longer?
Yes.
And with our present budget situation, enforcement activities are considered non-discretionary. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you explain what non-discretionary means?
It means that regardless of the budget situation, we are not going to stop processing complaints or conducting investigations or working with the Attorney General's office or the Office of Administrative Hearings. We have a budget augmentation process for when we have challenging budgetary times, and we did that this year where we asked for additional funds from our surplus, which is kind of like the savings account, to be moved into our operating budget to allow for enforcement operations to continue seamlessly.
Thank you for that. And so any budget questions we have, or actually actions that we're taking to address the budget, would be taken in places in the discretionary portion outside of enforcement activities.
Correct. Things such as travel, per diem, and temporary help are all discretionary items, and office supplies and things of that nature.
And we've taken action to address those discretionary budget items such as office supplies and per diem, et cetera, correct?
Correct, and temporary help as well.
Got it,
In
understood.
the licensing area, not in enforcement. Enforcement has not been impacted by the budgetary restrictions through temporary help.
Thank you. That was really helpful just in providing some context and sharing information to me. Those are some questions and concerns that came up. So I really appreciate both Ms. Monterrubio and Ms. Sorek for answering those questions. No further questions for me, Dr. Phillips.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Fu. Is there any further board discussion? Okay, so I believe that completes the enforcement report.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I really appreciate it. We'll now turn to item 20. And actually, before I do, I do want to address the potential confusion. At around between 11:15 and 11:30, we actually did say that we would be returning at 1 p.m. as a result of the items that we've taken up. And I do also understand that our colleagues at Solid actually did post a slide that said that we would be reconvening at 1 p.m. as well. And I was really heartened and just delighted to see at least 7 participants from the public sign on at 1 p.m. And so to the 7 people who signed on at 1 p.m., thank you for engaging with us, and thank you for coming on at 1 to participate in the process. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and take up item 20, and I'll turn to you, Ms. Sorek.
Okay, item 20 is a follow-up item from the April board meeting. At that meeting, Dr. Rogers asked for an update on telehealth and have some information on the conflicting information that was coming out of the federal government, as well as maybe a lack of information coming from the state about how telehealth was going to be applied in terms of application of HIPAA and other roles and responsibilities. After that time, Ms. Marks worked on drafting some informational guidance that our licensees can use to help kind of resolve some of those questions and concerns. So included in your meeting materials is the Board of Psychology Advisory on Telehealth and HIPAA during the COVID-19 public health emergency. So this is for informational purposes only, and just as a follow-up to the April meeting.
Ms. Sorek, I know we have a lot planned for November, but I just recognizing that Dr. Rogers did request this item, if we could also just transmit any materials related to this to Dr. Rogers, and then also, depending on what she requests, perhaps we can also have this again in November as a potential item just in case there are follow-up questions related to this. Is there a...
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Sorry. Is there board discussion on this item? Is there, Madam Moderator, could you please open public comment for item 20?
This is the moderator. Members of the public, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type, I would like to make a comment in the Ask field in the lower right of your screen, and send it to all panelists. And just a reminder, the hand raising feature is being reserved for the board members and staff to utilize during their discussion of agenda items. Members of the public, if you are interested in public comment, you can submit the request via the Q&A box and we can call on you then. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right, bringing it back to the board. I don't see any additional, oh, actually, Dr. Kasuga, would you like to make remarks on this item?
Yes, I just wanted to discuss and ask Ms. Sorick about something that I think I previously asked her for guidance with regards to telehealth. So one of the things that I personally experienced practicing in this new way of rendering psychological services through telehealth is the notification. There was some confusion between me and my colleagues about the notification that we usually post somewhere that's visible in our office. So consumers can contact the Board of Psychology for complaints and all that. And so now that we're performing telehealth, I was confused about how to follow the BNP 2936 law with regards notification. And the guidance that I got is to follow the rule as closely as I could. And what I've been doing is putting that notice as part of my report. And I was just like wondering if there's any further guidance on some of those things, not necessarily related to HIPAA, but are a little bit vague for practitioners.
Ms. Parks, is there, would you be able to provide some guidance on this? 2936.
I'm sorry. On 2936, are we? Is that part of the advisory? I think I got lost toggling back and forth.
That was not part of the advisory. This is how best to comply with that law with the telehealth provisions and the notification requirements that we have. And maybe Ms. Monterrubio can chime in on that as well.
Okay, I don't have that up in front of me, so I'd have to go look at it. Is the question specifically as to how to comply when somebody is engaging in telehealth?
Yes, Ms. Marks.
Well, I think that we have, I thought we had maybe issued some guidance on this, Ms. Sark. I'm not sure if we had or not, but I thought we had that question, and we talked a little bit about whether or not the notice that is given pursuant to 2936 could be given in a different way. Generally, the idea is that it's posted in a conspicuous location. Those locations aren't functioning right now, generally, and whether or not it could be provided in writing in some other way.
Hi, Noreen. This is Sandra. I believe in May, Dr. Kasuga may have asked this question, and I believe the response was that the board is encouraging that all licensees comply with the laws the best way they can when providing telehealth services, and it's good practice to post and email a notice to clients regarding telehealth services.
Right. I thought we had provided some kind of guidance on that. Dr. Kasuga, does that help at all?
Yeah. So that's also what I've been doing is sending the notice via email, and I also attach the link as part of my report at the end. So I just wanted to kind of like provide clarification on how I've interpreted that particular guidance from Ms. Monterrubio, as I think that I just wanted to talk about my experience, and I think that some of the licensees probably feel the same way since the start of the pandemic. We all most of us want to follow the law and all the rules as best we can, but everything is happening super quickly, and I understand this is an emergency situation. So, like, I've never done telehealth prior to the pandemic, and now I have to keep up to speed in a very quick manner, and I'm a bit anxious about making sure that I'm complying to everything as best as I can, as well as providing, appropriate access to care to a lot of people that need our services. So it's very unprecedented times, and any help that I think that we can provide all our licensees will be very helpful. And I know there's gonna be more questions that come up as this goes on for a while, and I'm just worried about client harm that are inadvertently being that could arise from the situation.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fu, I think I interrupted you. I think one of the lessons that we've learned here is that there were a lot of the, I'm not sure a lot, but there are some of the statutes and regulations that assume a relationship is going on in an office, and as we know, that's not necessarily the case and hasn't been, and this has just amplified that even more. But telehealth has been provided for quite some time, even before the pandemic. And as we go through the statutes and regulations and reviewing them, I think it gives us the opportunity to see how things may be approached to address the fact that telehealth is provided whether or not there's a pandemic.
Hi, Dr. Kasuga and Noreen. This is Sandra again. We could add this question to our COVID FAQs and then provide the response that we emailed to you, Dr. Kasuga, to help any licensees have a better understanding of what the expectation is.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio. And Ms. Marks also for your clarification. I understand that telehealth has been going on for some time. It's just a lot of licensees are now being forced to keep up to speed with everything. And I think that I've taken every single available telehealth training that is afforded to psychologists, but there are some things that are still lacking clarity, and anything that that we can provide our licensees will be helpful, I think, for this situation.
Dr. Phillips?
Apropos this discussion, in reviewing the statutes and regulations, and in particular 2936, we should take this into consideration in terms of any recommendations we're going to make to the board. So I would ask Ms. Monterrubio to make special note of that so we don't bypass it in the process of doing all the review.
Understood.
Thank you.
Is there additional board discussion on this item? All right, not seeing any. We will then turn to our last item of the day, item 21, recommendations for agenda items for future board meetings. I want to note that the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting, per our Government Code section 11125 and 11125.7a. So with that, are there any board members who would like to add items to a future board meeting? Dr. Kasuga?
Thank you, Mr. Fu. I think that you brought up a good point earlier with regards maybe having a follow-up on telehealth with regards COVID-19, if it's still relevant for our November meeting.
If without objection from the board, we'll go ahead and do that. I'm seeing no objection. So ordered. And then any additional board items on the board? All right. So, Madam Moderator, could you please open public comment for any members of the public who wish to comment on this item?
This is the moderator. The Q&A feature has been opened. For members of the public, if you would like to participate, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type, "I would like to make comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists. I do have individual identified as Catherine Campbell who would like to make a comment. And Catherine, your microphone has been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is Catherine Campbell. I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize that you had said Kathleen's name the last time I was speaking. But yes, I am wondering, it was brought up that how many of the over 1,000 people who are in the complaint phase, how many of those are duplicates? How many of them are the same person? And I think it's important to also look at how many times we took immediate action to protect the public. If there was a allegation of a licensee dismissing abuse, were they put on? I would like to see if I could see the number of how many people were accused of dismissing abuse to children, especially sexual abuse. and then if they were put on immediate leave. Because that's the first I heard of it at this meeting, that they could be put on leave, and I appreciate whoever brought that up, and that's important. And it's good to hear that enforcement hasn't ended, but as we heard, it's being delayed. And that has been something that's been part of this board, is to how to speed up time. So I think those people really aren't. And I have firsthand knowledge of when a person is put on, I like the fact that you said that some have to have a supervisor, but I know some don't have to have a supervisor. And it's ironic that they may be charged like $13,000 or whatever to pay for the cost of the investigation and, you know, their probation or whatever they have. But it's ironic that they're paying the board, but the person who they've harmed, hundreds of thousands of dollars are being lost by these families. We did a survey, 27% of protective parents in California go bankrupt to try to protect their children when your licensees dismiss abuse. And that is, there's just no reason for that. So I just find it ironic that you guys get paid, and yet the person they're licensed, you know, I mean, this is how I feel, is that you guys want to have really great people in your profession and be proud of that. And there are really great people, and there are really bad people as well. And when we protect the bad people, we hurt all the people. We're hurting the victims even more, and you're getting continual abuse. And you're hurting every other psychologist. It's kind of like the priests. You have good priests and bad priests, and it meant all priests were bad in people's minds, right? So I want you guys to do a great job in your enforcement. And so I think seeing these numbers in another meeting will help the public and have more transparency, because we're missing the point here with so many of the licensees. And I mean, we just need to stop children from being abused. And it's bad enough that it happens once. It's really bad when we allow it to continue. So, and to the point of that, you know, they would be, someone could say, oh, this person was not in compliance. How do you know how many times they're going out and servicing and paying, you know, people are paying them for their services as a licensee when they're on probation? Like, how many people actually go to look up theirs on the Board of Psychology when they're being recommended this from a lawyer and a judge? They're not going to your website to see, do they actually have a current, are they on probation? Are they this? And so, you know, you're saying that someone could say, oh, they're going to be doxed. Well, if nobody knows that they're working under the table, to speak, then no one, there's just no way to know. So those people, I believe, are working when they shouldn't be. And it's really disturbing that we would allow people who are on...
Ms. Campbell, I need to keep to wrap up now, because I think you're deviating a little bit from the...
Okay. I don't mean to.
So,
but I appreciate that.
Comments,
so let me wrap up for you. I really think we need to have more understanding when you're mentioning these numbers. Number one, as one of the board members, I believe it was brought up, we want to know how many people are repeat offenders, how many, you know, if they have multiple complaints. And number two, how many people have been accused of dismissing abuse to children in their evaluations and are put immediately on probation or not. But I mean, the whole probation thing, for me, they should lose their license. To think that someone could actually practice on probation if they just show their papers, you have no idea if they're showing their papers, and you may never know. So I don't mean to be off track with that, but I just think you just say, no, you're not allowed to practice. So I would like that to be further discussed, because I think that is a major issue.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Really appreciate your comments, and thank you for providing the summary of those comments as well. That was very instructive. I inadvertently skipped public comment on item 20. I apologize for that. So let me go ahead and since the panel is open already, What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for public comment on 20 as well. And I see from the chat box that we do have a comment a comment for item 20 by Dr. Jo Linda Crow. So if the moderator could kindly unmute Dr. Jo Linda Crow's line for public comment on item 20, I would greatly appreciate that.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I just wanted to go back to Dr. Kasuga's comments about these unusual times and how important it is to keep your licensees informed. And one of the things that we do at CPA and have been doing since March is really trying to put out as much information as we can for our members. And we have our COVID resource page that is open to CPA members and to non-members. So we have really relied upon the Board of Psychology to address the issues around licensing and around the kinds of things that Dr. Kasuga was bringing up. So the more information you can have available, the more information we can make available to our members and even more broadly. So I really want to support anything that you can do to address these questions that do continue to come up. I was concerned about an earlier comment during public comment that seemed a broad, sweeping statement that your licensees are not ethical. And I think I want to emphasize that indeed your licensees are trying their best to follow all of the regulations and the rules even during this odd time. So we all want to do whatever we can do to make sure that they're understanding how to make accommodations when they're necessary. So I appreciate the question, Dr. Kasuga, and we'll certainly do our part and assist the board in getting the information out.
Thank you, Dr. Jo Linda Crow. Dr. Winkleman, I'm not sure if you were for item 20 or for item 21, but since you were next in order before I intervene, could the moderator please unmute Dr. Winkleman's line?
Hi, it's Elizabeth Winkleman with CPA. Actually, Dr. Linda Crow has said mainly what I wanted to say, but I'll just reinforce that I want to thank Dr. Kasuga regarding item number 20 and the helpfulness of any additional guidance that can be provided by the board regarding telepsychology. And I just wanted to mention also that while there are some differences now during the coronavirus outbreak, that I think there is going forward, even after the emergency, public health emergency is under control, this is still going to be a much bigger part of practice, I believe, and very important and helpful for whatever definitive guidance we can share with the psychologists. So thank you for that, and thank you, Dr. Kasuga, and the board and the board staff for considering how to make more information available on telehealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman. I see next we have Kathleen Russell. Could the moderator please unmute Kathleen Russell's line for public comment for item 21?
Thank you. I just wanted to respond about the confusion regarding the time of the meeting. If you go back and watch the video, you'll see that President Fu said that we would reconvene at 1:15. He may have said 1 p.m. after that, but in this age of WebEx, people sign off when they hear a time that is the return time. So I think the record will prove that, and maybe other people stayed on longer, but the first suggestion was that the meeting would reconvene at 1:15. So I'm just really disappointed because, again, I mentioned at your February meeting that we had a statewide conference that was going on in October 3rd and 4th when the board met to discuss this whole issue of parental alienation and parental alienation syndrome. So I explained that to the board back in February, which is why we have not had a chance to discuss that issue, and really we're prepared and wanting to do that today. And it appears that we missed that discussion. Just in terms of future items for the board, I would like the board to deal with it seems to me an inconsistency between, Gloria Castro's presentation talks about the property rights of licensees are paramount, and I know that there's case law to that effect. And yet there is this section 2920.1, the public protection priority, which, just to clarify again, says whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, and I would insert there such as the property rights of licensees, then the protection of the public shall be paramount. So again, I don't understand why we have so many psychologists who've had multiple complaints to your board who continually get those complaints tossed out if the goal truly is the protection of the public, which particularly children have no voice if there are not members of the public speaking out on their behalf. So, I would like that explained, and I've seen Dr. Castro's presentation multiple times, but there seems to be a conflict between these two, the principle of public protection, which is supposed to be paramount, and the case law, which clearly lays out that the board really sees the protection of licensees' property right to own that license that they've invested money and educational time in. Just seems to me through all the years of attending meetings that the board does seem to defer to psychologists and to the licensing aspect of its work far more than it does to disciplining and weeding out the bad apples. And I think we all would like to see the bad apples weeded out, or I would hope so. So, yeah, and I know Josh Temple mentioned earlier the emergency order, which is available to remove any psychologist urgently who's harming the public. But when I spoke to him after another board meeting about that, he said it's rarely used, and it's very difficult to implement. So again, the burden of proof is much too high for the public to have any meaningful complaints taken seriously. And as I've said before, we have top attorneys from Washington, D.C. who've worked for the federal government who filed voluminous complaints with lots of detail and gotten one paragraph denial letters from this board saying it was insufficient evidence after sitting on the complaint for 3 years. So there's clearly a crisis here. And I think with the push and you talk about the public health crisis of COVID, well, the crisis in the family courts that the psychologists of California, your licensees, are participating in is also a public health crisis that is harming countless children. And this board needs to get into the modern era, become more transparent, and get your enforcement committee up to snuff and operating in public view and not behind closed doors. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, I'm going to ask the Madam Moderator to close the to close the public comment section. So I'm going to do something as I think in recognition that Dr. Phillips, I'm going to make my comment real quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over. Well, actually, let me go to you first. Dr. Phillips, do you have any items to add for item 21?
No, I didn't. I had a comment on item number 20, but it's important. I think the only thing I wanted to say in that regard was, as a member of the community of psychologists, I've been very heartened to see the lengths that psychologists have gone to make sure that they try to their very best ability to perform telehealth within the rules and regulations of the board. Obviously, there has to be some flexibility given the extraordinary times we're in, but I see people taking extensive steps to make sure that they are in compliance. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I think, apropos what Dr. Winkleman said, that there is, that in all likelihood, there's been a sea change relative to the delivery of psychological services. And I think we're going to find ourselves in a very different place that is probably going to involve more telehealth going forward. So it's important that we address these issues and make these things as clear as possible, not only for purposes of the pandemic, but also for purposes of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I'm also just mindful. Let me do two things first. So for this item, if there's no objections from the board on 21, I've been particularly struck by this this time we're in as the conversations about racial justice and racial equity, and that this isn't really a moment, this is a movement. And so I think for consideration, Ms. Sorick, I would love for the board, perhaps through its outreach and education committee, to reflect if there are opportunities for how the board could be really in this movement and recognition of the conversations and for justice that this country is having. If that's without objection from the board, Ms. Sorick, if that could be, and of course without objections from the chair of the outreach committee, I would love for that to be a part of that discussion.
I will defer to Dr. Tate, the chair of the committee.
The outreach committee would love to participate in that, and please, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but there have been movements between Ms. Sorick, President Fu, and I on discussions in this area.
Dr. Suga, your hand up?
Yes, Mr. Fu, I really appreciate you bringing that up, and that has also been at the forefront of my mind lately. And also to tie it back to what Dr. Phillips said and Dr. Winkleman said, I am in agreement that telepsychology will be here to stay well beyond the pandemic. It has forced the field to go more towards using technology and other means. But also as part of that, and as I've mentioned when we were talking about the ASPPB task force on social media, that that access to psychological services before the pandemic, when was already limited, and with during this pandemic, I think that access to psychological services is even more limited, and it is disproportionately affecting minority communities. And so I think that that's also something that I want to look into.
Certainly no objections here, Dr. Kasuga. Could you just restate your request so that we can just have clarity around that?
I think that, like, as part of your suggestion with regards looking at ways that the board can have an impact or support social justice, I'm also looking at disparities in access to mental health services with the transition to telepsychology and all the other things that are happening within our communities currently.
Understood. I think that would be not only pertinent but relevant, and I also think we have an ad hoc committee on telepsychology as well, which I think was dealing with regs, but I think is opportune to also discuss many of the issues raised, and perhaps even issues around SIPAC as well at some future point. So without objection from the board, I think we'll go not only will we have the telehealth guidance conversation brought back in November, but perhaps there can be some discussions about whether or not telepsychology committee and the comments there as well as outreach can be all connected in this conversation. Does that sound, does that address the issue you're raising, Dr. Kasuga?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so seeing no further items, one thing I do want to say is I am attentive and cognizant that in this time of Zoom meetings and webinars, there might be lapses in attention. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to return back to item 19 and specifically item 19.1 because while the board did go into, before the board went into closed session, we did say we would come back at 1 p.m. and the solid training did also update the slides to reflect that. I understand that apparently we did not have a captive audience after the morning. So despite the fact that I love our public attendees thinking they're watching the entire hearing, that apparently was not the case. So I'm going to ask if Ms. Monterrubio, you can go ahead and provide for us what you shared at 1 o'clock, or actually 1:01 or 1:02 for that item. We'll reopen it up for public comment and we'll continue that discussion there. So we're going back to item 19A1. So Ms. Monterrubio.
Thank you, President Boo. As I mentioned, the Enforcement Committee met in May 2020 to review the attached Child Custody Stakeholder Meeting Implementation Plan. And items 1, 2, 3, and 4 have been completed. The committee did discuss item 5, but additional information was needed, and further discussion will take place at our next Enforcement Committee meeting in September. This item is for informational purposes only, and no action is required.
Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio. I think that was like almost exactly to the word for what you presented to us at 1 p.m. Dr. Phillips, did you have any additions to that presentation? And if you can do it also to the word like Ms. Monterrubio, then.
No, sir, I think that covers it.
All right, so with Ms. Monterrubio's presentation and with Dr. Phillips redone like a good television show, we're now going to open it up for public comment for item 19A. So Madam Moderator, could you please open for public comment 19A, please?
This is the moderator. I've opened the Q&A feature. Members of the public, you can click on the Q&A icon at the bottom center of your WebEx screen and type, I would like to make a comment in the ask field and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. I do have Catherine Campbell who would like to make a comment. Catherine, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, thank you so much. I think a lot of maybe what I will say, I appreciate you reopening this up, number 19, and I've been jumping back and forth between meetings to try to make as much of your meeting today, but I didn't know when you were coming back, but yep, I missed this part, so I do appreciate this. And I will say that I just feel as if I know I've heard the discussion of you talking about licenses and that it's property, and yet if a doctor is in complete gross negligence, they're not going to let that doctor continue. If a police officer is in gross negligence, they're not going to say, as long as you're with a supervisor, or if you tell someone you're on probation. I mean, they're just not practicing. I'm not sure why, what the legal ramifications are, but I cannot imagine that we should allow that to continue, knowing what a person can be doing in the process of hurting other people. And I do appreciate the fact that most of the psychologists and licensees are good, but for the handful or as many of there are who are doing this, who are hurting our public, we need to do what's right. And I believe this is a section that included the parental alienation. So I'm going to ask that the board would look at some empirical data and listen to what is being said. And I will express my, how should I put it? my disappointment that the board would move forward with parental alienation even without syndrome, and that it's not accepted anywhere. So I know people are pushing to accept it, and I understand that some people can do whatever they can to coercively control someone and make them think something. And I think those are two separate things. So I really appreciate if the board could, I don't know, just really if you could just have the courage to say, where could we do better? And I know as a board, you say you're here to do what's best. And I hear all those comments, like how so most of you do, but you need to understand there are some that are very deceptive and they're not you. And for those people who are not you, who want what's best, we need to make sure that they're not harming the public as they are now and as they have been for years. And if I had more people calling us and saying that the board had really helped me out instead of saying that all of this is being dismissed, I guess we wouldn't be here at your meetings. But that's just not the case. People are calling and are very upset about what's happening. So
thank you, Ms. Campbell. We really appreciate those comments, and thank you for staying with us and participating on this item. And can you, just to wrap up your comments so that we can go to Ms. Russell and Dr. Jo Linda Crow after you?
Sure. I think I'm done. I appreciate people being honest with themselves, and I think I don't want anyone to be defensive and say I do a good job. I want us to really open our hearts to see the truth of what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Madam Moderator, could you please unmute Kathleen Russell's line, please? And then after that, we'll have Dr. Jo Linda Crow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, President Fu, for reopening and just reiterating what was missed in the earlier presentation. As the organization for whom the stakeholder meeting was called, I appreciate getting a clear report on what was reported earlier to the board. And I did kind of quickly run through my questions for the enforcement committee, and I'll just quickly reiterate them because I would like to see the board take these up at a future moment. Our stakeholder meeting was very collaborative, and there was discussion of continuing to collaborate. Now I'm feeling a bit hindered by the process of, I'm not clear. I heard Ms. Monterrubio say that the enforcement committee would be meeting in September to deal with item 5 of this child custody stakeholder implementation plan. But I have questions about, I believe it was item 2. And so those just quickly are, in the case of someone who is a subject matter expert saying how they answer. You wrote, depending on the answer given, further review will be undertaken on a case-by-case basis. So what would this further review look like? Who would be conducting the further review? And what would the potential outcomes be on a case-by-case basis as it's listed on your application? Does that mean someone who says they believe that parental alienation syndrome should be included in the DSM would be prohibited from serving as a subject matter expert or not? It's written in a very vague fashion, and because the public has no ability to interact with the enforcement committee because it, I guess by statute, only has 3 members, which allows you to keep it private, even though there are other boards of the state of California whose enforcement committees meet on video and have for years. I guess I'd just like to know how and when the public can learn about this case-by-case basis, who's conducting it, what does it look like, what does the screening question even mean, because it seems to have been watered down. And that's really my only 3 questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. We'll answer all those questions at the conclusion of public comment. So Dr. Jo Linda Crow.
Yes, thank you. I feel a bit like we're going over ground that we've gone over many times, but to specifically refer back to the discussion about the stakeholder meeting, I want to clarify something that Ms. Russell said, and that is that CPA as an organization did not suggest that parental alienation syndrome is an accepted syndrome. What we said was, in our comments, was that the term parental alienation syndrome has been debunked, and there is significant amount of evidence in the literature to support the fact that it is not recognized. What we did say was that we had consulted with a number of experts. We pointed out the fact that the stakeholder meeting was convened without sufficient number of experts in this area who have worked their entire careers in this area to provide a balanced conversation during that meeting. What we said at the time, I don't have the exact language in front of me, but what we said at the time was that the notion of parental alienation has been documented and written about, not parental alienation syndrome. I don't think this meeting is the time to get into that academic discussion and that discussion about the nuances between the notion of whether or not parental alienation can occur and the distinction between saying that and saying that parental alienation syndrome should be recognized. So this is a very complicated area, obviously, because it continues to come up. So I would also support the notion that we had requested that perhaps there could be another stakeholder meeting. I don't think the board felt at that time that would be a possibility. But clearly, if there is going to be continued discussion around this particular issue and around the implementation of what came out of that stakeholder meeting, then we would again want to be a part of that. And we would strongly argue that we need to be sure that we have the right people at the table to have a balanced conversation before as the board is making its decision. So I wanted to first clarify that, you know, what I didn't want it to be mischaracterized about what CPA said. And then again, just reiterate, if this is going to be a continuing discussion, which it seems to be, that we just make sure that we have all of the stakeholders at the table, all of the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jo Linda Crow. Seeing no further public comment, can Madam Moderator, could you please close the public comment section? And then I'm gonna, there were several questions posed, and I think Ms. Monterrubio, you might be the right person for those questions. So I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay, this is Sandra, and when we added the question to the expert application, again, the only word that we added was syndrome, and I know that Ms. Russell said we watered it down, but that was the only word that we did add. We have discussed reaching out to former board members to assist in the review of expert applications and help us determine which applicants meet the hiring criteria. So we did just add this question to our expert application. We have not yet received any applications with a response to this question yet. But once we do, again, we will have a panel of former board members available to help us determine, based on the response that we receive from the applicant, as to whether or not this individual should be an expert for the Board of Psychology.
Thank you, Ms. Monterrubio. So is there additional board, Dr. Phillips?
Yes, just briefly, and to make it entirely clear, we had come up with a modification to the question in advance of ever going back into a public meeting. So we brought that modification to the meeting. I think the California Psychological Association had expressed some concern about the fact that we were focusing only on parental alienation as a concept. We clarified that after consulting with a subject matter expert, we made the determination that perhaps the weakest point in the parental alienation world was in advocacy on behalf of parental alienation syndrome. And despite reassurances from the public, there are still mental health professionals that are advocating for the parental alienation syndrome. How we are going to respond is going to depend in large part on what the former board members say in response to the review of the application. But we wanted to leave it open-ended enough so they could explain themselves and we would get a better sense of their general attitude for parental alienation and the parental alienation syndrome. So the reason that the questions are vague is so that we can solicit their thinking. If it becomes check the box, we won't have any idea what exactly it is that they're thinking about all this. The other thing I wanted to mention, and we've gone over this several times, but just for the benefit of the public, the enforcement committee meeting involves 2 board members. The reason it only involves 2 board members is exactly for the reason that we want those meetings to be confidential, because there are almost all of the board enforcement staff sits in on those meetings. It may not occur to other people, but our board enforcement staff has been threatened in the past, and out of concern for their physical safety, we want to protect their identities. In addition to which, if we had an open enforcement committee meeting, we would not be able to have the kind of colloquy we have about specific cases, about staff member concerns. It's a much more freewheeling thing without having the public there. In the interest of transparency, however, nothing is ever decided in that meeting without it being brought back to a full board meeting for discussion with the board, and not involving anyone in the enforcement staff typically, other than Ms. Monterubio, as she is a visible representative of the enforcement staff. So it's done for a variety of reasons. I think we've tried to describe this on several occasions. Apparently, our explanations were not understandable, but I think there's a very good reason for continuing to conduct the committee meetings in that way. But we never take any action that binds the board in that meeting without bringing it back to the full board for consideration by the full board in the interest of transparency. So that being said, I will yield the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Is there additional board discussion? All right. I don't see additional board discussion here on this item. I think it was helpful for us to go back to this item and discuss further, so I appreciate everyone's participation on this. We've dispensed with all the items before us, and so I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So
We have a motion to adjourn from Dr. Kate, and it sounded like Ms. Cervantes was the second on that. So we will be in adjournment, and we will return later this fall for our 4th board meeting of the year. So thank you for everyone's participation, and have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.